Before we dive into today's intense story, I'd really appreciate it if you could take just 1 second to hit that subscribe button. It's a huge motivator for me to keep bringing you these dramatic horror tales. Your support means the world. Now, let's get into the action. It was a crisp morning in early spring when Caroline Davis, the newly appointed police chief of Lakewood, sat on her grandmother's old porch swing, sipping coffee. The faint pink hue of the sunrise bathed her beloved Victorian house, a landmark in the neighborhood. The faded purple trim, a family legacy, shone brightly against the soft morning light. Her peaceful routine was suddenly interrupted by a familiar figure, a woman she knew all too well, Karen Thompson, with a smug smile and an envelope clutched tightly in her hands. Karen briskly walked towards Caroline's mailbox. Caroline's stomach tightened. She knew what this was about. Karen, the new president of the recently formed HOA, had been eyeing her property for months. As she dropped the glossy brochure and a formal invitation into the mailbox, she lingered a moment too long, her phone snapping photos of the garden, the roses that had been lovingly tended to by Caroline's grandmother for years. Caroline watched her from the window, feeling a knot tighten in her chest. The HOA was imposing new rules on the neighborhood, demanding conformity with uniformity. The invitation came with a hefty fee. A membership fee of $5,000 and monthly dues of $350. But it wasn't the money that bothered Caroline. It was the list of requirements, which included stripping the historical charm from her house, the removal of the purple trim, the replacement of her grandmother's rose garden, and even the removal of the antique wind chimes. It felt like a direct attack on her family's legacy. And Caroline had no intention of bowing to it. As Karen turned to leave, a phone pressed to her ear. Caroline knew this would be the start of something far bigger than just a refusal to join the HOA. Days turned into weeks, and Karen Thompson wasted no time escalating the pressure. The once peaceful neighborhood was now a battleground, with Caroline's historic home at the center of the storm. Every morning, Karen and her HOA members would be seen walking past her property, taking photos and whispering to each other, their sharp eyes scanning every corner of Caroline's beloved house. At first, the complaints were small: a stray rose bush growing too tall, a loose shutter hanging on one window. But soon, the harassment took a darker turn. Caroline woke up one Saturday morning to find a brightly colored, neon orange warning taped to her front door, citing violations that didn't exist before the HOA's involvement. Her grandmother's roses, once a symbol of pride, were suddenly deemed an unsightly nuisance. And the beautiful, original purple trim that had adorned the house for decades was labeled a code violation. Every day, another letter was added to the pile. Then, Karen's tactics grew more brazen. One Tuesday afternoon, Caroline returned home to find Karen and her HOA cronies trespassing on her property, measuring her grass with rulers, scrutinizing her front yard like it was a crime scene. "This is 3.5 inches over code," Karen said triumphantly to her sidekick, Barbara, who scribbled furiously in a notebook. With each incident, Caroline's blood boiled. But she remained calm. A seasoned investigator, she knew better than to react impulsively. Instead, she quietly installed security cameras around her property, capturing every detail, every photo, every complaint, every trespass. As the days went by, Caroline meticulously documented everything. building a case that would soon reveal the corruption behind the HOA's illegal tactics. The harassment wasn't just about the property, it was about control, intimidation, and power. Caroline knew this was more than a personal attack, it was part of a larger, more sinister plan that she would expose in time. It was an ordinary evening. One that Caroline would have never guessed would be the tipping point in her battle with the Hoa. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting a soft orange glow across the sky. Caroline had just finished reviewing security footage from the day when she heard a loud crackle from outside. Her heart skipped a beat. At first, she thought it was nothing more than the usual noise of the neighborhood settling in for the night. But then the smell hit her, a burning scent. Sharp and undeniable, racing to her window. Caroline's breath caught in her throat. The unmistakable orange glow of flames illuminated the sky. Coming from her beloved home. Her Victorian house. The one that had been in her family for generations, was now engulfed in flames. Panic surged through her. But she forced herself to stay calm. She grabbed her phone and dialed 911 as she raced outside. The fire was spreading quickly. The historic wood creaking under the intense heat. Firefighters were already on the scene, battling the inferno with all their might. But Caroline couldn't tear her eyes away from the destruction. Every moment felt like an eternity as the once beautiful purple trim, the roses, and the memories of her grandmother's careful tending to the property were reduced to ash. And then she saw her, standing on her neatly manicured lawn, a steaming cup of coffee in hand. Karen Thompson stood at a distance, watching the flames devour Caroline's home. Her face was unreadable. But the smug posture, the casual sip of her coffee, made Caroline's blood run cold. Karen had never been shy about her disdain for the historic house. But this felt like something more. Caroline's mind raced. She already suspected foul play. And now it felt like confirmation. The fire chief approached her, offering condolences. "It looks like an electrical fire," he said. But Caroline knew better. She had kept meticulous records of her home's annual inspections. And everything had been up to code. As Caroline stood there, unable to look away from the flames, a cold realization hit her. Her security cameras, the ones she had strategically placed to capture evidence of the HOA's harassment, had stopped recording exactly 4 hours before the fire started. It wasn't just a coincidence. Her home was set ablaze, and Karen, with her calm demeanor and knowing gaze, was too close to the flames for this to be an accident. Caroline could feel the weight of the situation. This was no longer about the HOA's petty rules, this was about something far more dangerous: arson, manipulation, and corruption. And she would not rest until she had the evidence to bring them all to justice. The fire that consumed Caroline's Victorian home was a turning point. The destruction, the loss of her grandmother's legacy, it all fueled her determination to uncover the truth. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fall into place. And Caroline knew that this wasn't a random act of arson. No. This was part of something far more sinister. Over the next few weeks, Caroline poured herself into her investigation, methodically reviewing records and combing through her security footage. She started connecting dots she had only suspected before: mysterious fires in nearby neighborhoods, homes that had all suffered from unexplained accidents after resisting the HOA's pressure. The pattern was undeniable. In each case, homes that refused to comply with Karen and her HOA's demands had either been damaged in some way or, like Caroline's, had been set on fire. As Caroline dug deeper, The trail led to a web of corruption. Karen Thompson had created a carefully orchestrated plan to target homeowners who resisted the HOA's rules. Once their properties were either damaged or deemed uninhabitable, Karen and her associates would swoop in, purchasing the homes for pennies on the dollar through shell companies, flipping them for huge profits, and selling them to developers. Caroline felt a cold fury grow inside her as she read through the financial records that her private investigator had uncovered: money changing hands, bribes to local officials, and a network of shady transactions designed to line Karen's pockets. But Caroline wasn't just another victim. As police chief, she had access to resources others didn't. She started using her authority to build a case, quietly gathering evidence and preparing for a takedown. She enlisted the help of the FBI, who were all too eager to lend a hand when they realized the scope of the conspiracy. The former Hoa treasurer, who had been coerced into falsifying records, had come forward, terrified for her safety, and handed over a USB drive containing 5 years' worth of incriminating financial records. Caroline didn't let up. With each new piece of evidence, her resolve hardened. She knew that Karen and her associates had been operating for years, wrecking lives and profiting off the destruction of their homes. But no more. The people who had been bullied into selling their homes at a loss, like Mrs. Rodriguez, whose family's prized heirlooms were destroyed in a suspicious garage fire, would finally get the justice they deserved. In her office, surrounded by stacks of evidence, Caroline began to formulate a plan. It would take time, precision, and careful coordination. But soon, Karen Thompson and her corrupt Hoa would learn the hard way that Caroline Davis, the police chief, was no one to be underestimated. The night of the Hoa meeting arrived, and Caroline's heart raced with purpose. For months, she had gathered evidence, photographs, financial records, video footage, pieces of a puzzle that would expose Karen and her corrupt Hoa for what they truly were. The time had come to confront the woman who had set her house ablaze, destroyed her grandmother's legacy, and tried to tear apart the fabric of their neighborhood. Caroline arrived at the community center, the familiar building that had been a gathering place for neighbors, now a battleground for the truth. She stepped inside, her gaze steady and unwavering as she saw Karen, the smug president, at the head of the table, ready to present her next set of lies. The room was filled with the usual Hoa members, some unaware of the storm that was about to hit, others who had already begun to sense the shift in power. With every eye on her, Caroline walked to the front of the room, her heels clicking against the linoleum floor. She reached into her briefcase, pulling out a thick folder filled with irrefutable evidence. Karen raised an eyebrow, sneering as Caroline spread out the documents across the table. "What is this? More wild accusations?" Karen scoffed, her usual confidence faltering just slightly. But Caroline wasn't intimidated. She calmly began to lay out the evidence. "These are your security camera images, Karen, showing you and your board members on my property the night of the fire," Caroline said, her voice steady. The room fell silent as the footage played on the screen, showing Karen's group clearly tampering with the property, setting the stage for the destruction. Next, Caroline presented the financial records, payments made to Karen's shell companies after each accidental fire. She displayed emails that exposed the sinister plan to target homeowners who resisted joining the Hoa, forcing them out by any means necessary. The room was filled with gasps as the shocking details unfolded. Karen's smug expression faded. "This is nonsense," she sputtered. But Caroline wasn't finished. "And here we have the text messages between you and your board members, discussing how you deliberately manipulated electrical wiring to make it look like an accident. Do you recognize these?" Caroline's words cut through the tension like a knife. Karen was cornered. Her attempts at deflection crumbled as the evidence mounted. Just then, the door opened, and FBI agents flooded into the room, their badges raised. "Karen Thompson, you're under arrest for conspiracy, arson, and corruption," the lead agent announced, his voice booming. The shock in Karen's face was priceless. She tried to flee, but it was too late. As the agents moved to cuff her, Caroline's neighbors, who had silently endured Karen's reign of terror for years, erupted into applause. With Karen and her accomplices taken away, the Hoa was officially dismantled. The community center, once a place of division, was now a symbol of unity and justice. Caroline stood outside the building, watching as her neighbors, finally free from the shadow of Karen's influence, celebrated together. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt alive again. A true community. Caroline's Victorian home was restored, the purple trim shining in the sun once more. The roses, carefully replanted, bloomed with vibrant colors, a tribute to her grandmother's legacy. As she sat on her porch, sipping a cup of coffee, she realized that true justice wasn't just about punishing the wrongdoers, it was about rebuilding something better. The house, the neighborhood, the community, they were all stronger now, united by the truth and by the courage to stand up to tyranny.